General Hospital will reveal Lulu had crossed a line from which there was no return, and once the truth of Joe's real parentage erupted into the public, broadcast not just in whispers but in raw, explosive declaration before an audience of friends, family, and strangers alike, the emotional storm she unleashed could no longer be contained. What had begun as a mission driven by curiosity, cloaked in a self-righteous sense of justice and moral obligation, devolved into an act of devastation. Her decision to expose Joe's secret without warning, preparation, or compassion shattered not only his fragile sense of identity but obliterated the very foundation upon which he had built his childhood. Gio, a young boy already grappling with the loss of his adoptive mother, was left defenseless against a truth that was thrust upon him with no shield and no sanctuary. The revelation that Dante and Brooke Lynn were his biological parents was not spoken to him gently, not whispered with care or love, it was screamed into existence through the argument of two women, one of whom claimed to be acting in his best interest. Instead, she pierced through his soul. It wasn't justice that Lulu delivered on that stage, it was betrayal, laid bare for all to see. And there he stood, on a stage meant for celebration and performance, caught in the blinding glare of spotlight and the stunned silence of an audience unprepared for heartbreak. With hands trembling and breath shaking, Gio, in what would become one of the most unforgettable moments in Port Charles history, declared that he was unwanted. That he was a mistake born of deception. That the parents he'd known had been lies, and the ones who shared his blood had chosen not to claim him until now. It wasn't just a confession, it was a cry of anguish. His voice cracked as he tried to speak through the lump in his throat, then gave in to the tears. And in the most symbolic act of pain, he lifted his violin, his sanctuary, his escape, his voice when he couldn't speak, and smashed it into pieces. The echo of wood shattering on the floor was louder than any applause that had come before. Gasps spread through the room like wildfire. Faces turned to one another in stunned disbelief. And Gio, tears streaking his cheeks, shoulders trembling with silent sobs, ran off stage, leaving a trail of heartbreak behind him. It was not just a performance cut short. It was a life thrown into chaos. Word of the event reached Sonny within minutes. And what stirred inside him was not just anger, it was wrath, quiet and suffocating, deeper than rage. Sonny Corinthos had weathered storms, buried loved ones, held the weight of loss on his back for years. But nothing had prepared him for the sight of his grandson shattered like a porcelain figure by a truth revealed without mercy. He had known of Joe's parentage, had chosen, along with Lois, to protect him from the burdens of that knowledge until he was ready, until they could offer him answers with open arms and loving hearts. But now, that choice was gone, stolen by Lulu's blind determination and reckless pursuit. When Lulu arrived at Sonny's penthouse, perhaps hoping to explain, perhaps to plead her case or seek understanding, what she encountered was not fury expressed in shouts or thrown furniture. It was the cold, unmoving silence of a man who had watched yet another piece of his family crumble. Sonny didn't need to raise his voice. His silence was the verdict. His eyes, hollow and piercing, were the sentence. He looked at Lulu the way a father might look at a daughter who had betrayed the family, not with hatred, but with such profound disappointment that it hurt more than any insult ever could. He didn't need to say much. He simply let her stand there and feel the weight of what she had done. And when he finally did speak, each word landed like a stone. He told her she had destroyed something fragile. That she had put her own need to uncover secrets ahead of a child's emotional safety. That if she truly cared for Gio, she would have waited. Would have let the truth be delivered with dignity, not shouted through walls where he could hear every word like a dagger to the chest. He reminded her that good intentions do not excuse poor execution, and certainly not cruelty disguised as courage. Lulu, unable to meet his eyes for long, realized then that there was no redemption to be found in that room. Not yet. She had sought justice and uncovered truth, but what she had truly unearthed was pain. She had taken the most vulnerable member of their family and cast him into a storm without a lifeline. She left Sonny's home that night with a heart heavier than when she entered. The cold air outside somehow less biting than the chill of disappointment in Sonny's voice. She had lost more than his trust, she had lost the innocence of believing that truth always sets people free. In this case, it had bound Gio in chains of grief and confusion, and Sonny would never forget who had forged them. Meanwhile, Gio remained missing from the festivities. Tucked away in a corner where Lucy eventually found him, curled in on himself, as if trying to disappear. Emma tried to comfort him, but there were no words strong enough to fix what had been broken. The child who had once charmed a crowd with the bow of his violin now struggled to breathe beneath the weight of a new identity he never asked for. His tears came not just from betrayal, but from the terrible realization that he had been living in a world built on fiction. Sonny, even as his anger simmered, mobilized everything at his disposal, not to punish, but to protect. He called in favors, made quiet arrangements. Gio was to be shielded now, from the press, from questions, even from family, until he could decide what he wanted for himself. Sonny knew that love could not be demanded or explained, it had to be shown, patiently, persistently, without expectation. And so he waited, determined to let Gio come back on his own terms. Even if it took weeks or months. What mattered now was healing. But nothing would ever be the same. Not for Lulu, who walked the streets of Port Charles with the guilt of what she'd done pressing down like lead. Not for Carly, torn between loyalty to Sonny and sympathy for Gio. Not for Dante and Brooklyn, whose world had been turned upside down without warning. And certainly not for Gio, whose music had always been his voice, and now, with his violin shattered and truth exposed, would have to learn to sing again in a language he had never spoken before, one of trust, of family, and of fragile beginnings rebuilt from ruins. He told her, his voice steady, grave, and colder than winter air, that if she had truly cared about Gio, if her heart had really been in the right place, she never would have weaponized the truth against him. Sonny's words were deliberate. Cutting not through volume but through weight, each syllable a stone dropped into the silence between them. Truth, he said, was not a weapon to be wielded recklessly. Not a torch to burn through someone's life without thought of the flames it might leave behind. What she had done was not an act of love or compassion, it was an act of self-satisfaction disguised as justice. She had not exposed the secret for Joe's sake, but for her own. She had wanted to be the one to uncover it, to hold it, to wield it like proof of her moral superiority, and in doing so, she had shattered the very boy she claimed to protect. He didn't need to shout. Sonny Corinthos never did. His authority came not from rage but from conviction, from the kind of stillness that made others uneasy. It wasn't anger that made Lulu's knees weak, it was the disappointment in his voice, the heavy pause between his words, and above all, the unwavering look in his eyes. A look that told her she had lost something more sacred than approval, she had lost his trust. And then there was silence. Sonny let it linger. Let it become a mirror in which Lulu had no choice but to see herself, not as the hero she thought she was, but as the person who had caused irreparable harm. No amount of justification could undo the truth, she had turned a child's life upside down not with care, but with recklessness disguised as urgency. The silence between them was louder than any confrontation, and in that silence, Lulu was forced to feel the full consequence of her actions. When she finally turned to leave, her shoulders slumped. Her face pale, she felt the gravity of what she had done pressing down like iron chains. She walked away from Sonny's penthouse with the devastating realization that not everyone forgives. And that some mistakes, no matter how noble the intention, leave scars that never heal. Sonny's anger did not stem from pride or wounded ego. It was born from something far deeper and more personal. The quiet, unyielding love he had for Gio. The boy wasn't just someone in his orbit, he was part of his legacy, part of the tangled, beautiful mess that was his family. Sonny, along with Lois, had kept the truth of Joe's parentage buried not out of malice or deceit, but out of a desperate desire to protect a child from the chaos of a lineage wrapped in mob entanglements, family estrangements, and emotional landmines. They had made a silent pact in the shadows of grief after Camilla's death to give Gio a life of peace. To let him grow without the burdens of a complicated heritage. But now that choice had been stolen from them. Lulu, in her crusade, had bulldozed through the fragile wall they had built to shield Gio. She had ignored Cody's cautions, brushed aside Carly's concern, and plowed forward without consideration for what would happen once the secret was out. To Sonny, this was not just betrayal, it was a desecration of something sacred. It was the disruption of a carefully constructed safety net that he had tried so hard to maintain. Sonny had carried the weight of Camilla's death not just as a loss, but as a responsibility. He had vowed, silently, fiercely, to make sure Gio never felt abandoned, never felt unloved. Never felt like a mistake. Every action he took in the boy's life was measured, calculated to reinforce the belief that Gio was wanted, cherished, and protected. And in one reckless moment, Lulu had undone all of that. She had stripped Gio of his sense of security, of his peace, of his identity, and flung him into a world where he could no longer trust the people around him. Sonny's wrath was not the explosive kind, it was the kind that seeped into the floorboards, the kind that made people realize too late what they had broken. Lulu, standing in the center of that emotional wreckage, saw it for the first time. Not just the shattered violin on the stage, not just the tears on Joe's face. But the deeper wounds, those carved into a child's heart when the people he trusted most had kept the truth from him. And when someone who claimed to care ripped that veil away without compassion or preparation. She hadn't just told the truth. She had detonated it. And in doing so, she had robbed Gio of the chance to process it with love. Sonny could see no honor in that. Only tragedy. Even Carly, caught in the middle of the fallout, had been left shaken. She had warned Lulu. She had sensed the danger. And now she, too, had to watch as the boy they had all tried to shield was left raw, exposed, and alone. Sonny's disappointment extended beyond Lulu's mistake. It echoed through the halls of his home, into every decision he had made, every effort he had taken to do right by a child born into complexity. Lulu left that night not as a woman triumphant in truth, but as a mourner of innocence, hers, Joe's, and perhaps the family's as a whole. She would carry this burden for a long time. Because Sonny had made her see what no confrontation could, that some wounds, when inflicted carelessly, do not close with time. Some fractures, especially those in the heart of a child, only deepen. And some truths, no matter how righteous they may seem, are not hers to tell. Before everything unraveled so publicly and painfully, Lulu had already begun her quiet investigation into Joe's true parentage. Her instincts whispered of a hidden truth, one carefully guarded by those closest to the boy. Though she never voiced it aloud at first, Lulu couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Joe's story than what had been told. With mounting suspicion and a relentless drive to unearth the facts, she enlisted Cody's help. He didn't fully agree with her methods nor her motivations, but he remained by her side. Tethered by a sense of loyalty and perhaps a faint hope that Lulu was wrong, that they wouldn't find what they feared. Cody, ever cautious, urged discretion. He knew how fragile the people involved were, especially Gio. He knew the weight such a truth could carry, and how it could crush the wrong shoulders if it fell the wrong way. But Lulu, blinded by purpose, pressed forward. She tracked documents, eavesdropped on tense conversations, and gradually began to piece together a lineage long hidden behind silence and misdirection. As the fragments came together, Dante, Brooke Lynn, the adoption, Lois' strange protectiveness, Lulu felt both vindicated and horrified. Carly had tried to stop her. When she discovered Lulu's plan, she warned her of the potential consequences, of the damage that could be done if such a sensitive truth were revealed in the wrong way, at the wrong time. But when Carly saw Lulu drawing Cody deeper into the web and heard her speak of the connection between Gio and Dante, her own certainty began to crumble. If what Lulu was saying was true, and if Sonny had known all along, then the betrayal extended not only to Gio, but to Carly herself. She had always believed that she and Sonny were allies, partners in trust. If he had withheld this from her, what else had he hidden? Fueled by this uncertainty, Lulu pushed harder. And that trail of questions, doubts, and hunches led her straight to Sonny's doorstep. It was then that she began to understand, too late, that the truth wasn't a treasure waiting to be claimed, it was a landmine. Cody pleaded with her to pause, to consider the fallout. But Lulu's fire had already consumed her better judgment. During the nurses' ball, with emotions high and the spotlight burning brightly, Lulu infiltrated the backstage area in pursuit of Lois. The confrontation was inevitable, a clash of fury and protectiveness. While the two women argued heatedly, Lois defending her choices, Lulu demanding justice, neither noticed Gio lingering near the dressing room door, searching for his missing headphones. What he heard wasn't intended for his ears, but it didn't matter. The words sank deep, cutting through the last shreds of his innocence. Lulu's voice rang out, sharp and unfiltered, declaring that his life had been a lie. That Dante and Brooke Lynn were his real parents, not the adoptive mother and father he had cherished. She didn't mean to destroy him, but that's exactly what she did. In that instant, Joe's world imploded. Everything he thought he knew, every foundation he had clung to in the wake of Camila's death, shattered. He was no longer grounded. He was drifting, drowning in betrayal, confusion, and the crushing realization that he had been the last to know the truth about himself. Overcome by emotion, Gio fled the scene. He didn't finish his performance. Instead, he stormed onto the stage, choked back his tears, raised his violin, his only voice, his only escape, and smashed it into splinters. The crowd, stunned, could only watch in silence. It was not a tantrum. It was a funeral, the burial of a childhood lived under illusion. And when he ran, he left behind the sound of wood cracking, of a life breaking. Emma found him later, hidden in a corner backstage, curled into himself like a wounded animal. She didn't speak, didn't try to fix it, she simply sat beside him, offering what little comfort she could. But Gio didn't need words. He needed time. He needed to grieve not just the truth, but the way it had found him, like a thief in the night, stealing not just answers, but safety. Back in the audience, Carly was trapped between two collapsing worlds. She had seen the devastation on Joe's face, heard the pain in his voice, and knew Lulu had gone too far. But she couldn't deny what cut just as deep, the knowledge that Sonny had kept her in the dark. For a woman who had stood by his side through storms and wars, who had defended him even when it cost her, this betrayal was sharp and bitter. Carly no longer knew who to protect. She couldn't blame Lulu, not entirely. She couldn't defend Sonny, not without lying to herself. So she chose Gio. Not with speeches or confrontations, but by being there, silently, unconditionally. Carly decided not to add her voice to the cacophony of guilt and explanation. She would not be another adult trying to justify their lies. She would be a quiet presence in Joe's life. A hand held out when he was ready to take it. She would be the stability he so desperately needed. Sonny, meanwhile, understood that no apology would be enough. Words could not repair what had been done. Gio needed more, he needed space, understanding, and above all, safety. So Sonny did what had to be done. He made the hard choice. He isolated Gio from the noise, the press, even from Dante and Brooke Lynn. Not as punishment, but as protection. Sonny no longer wanted to hide behind excuses. He wanted to act. To restore what little could still be saved. He ordered silence, demanded patience from everyone involved. Joe's healing would be on his terms, not theirs. Sonny no longer believed in half-truths or quiet sacrifices. He believed only in action now, in the slow, painful, but necessary work of rebuilding a broken boy's trust. As for Lulu, the weight of her actions began to settle over her like a winter frost. She had believed in the righteousness of her mission. She had clung to the idea that truth, once revealed, would set everyone free. But now she saw that timing matters. That truth, when delivered without care, can become as cruel as any lie. She was no longer a crusader for justice, she was a woman marked by regret, carrying the burden of a truth told too soon, too loudly, and too selfishly. She left Port Charles that night not as a victor, but as a shadow of the person she had once been. Behind her, a town wrestled with broken trust. A family strained under the weight of revelation. And a boy, barely old enough to understand betrayal, was forced to ask the most painful question of all: if everything had been a lie, then who could he ever believe again? And somewhere, in the quiet corners of the night, the sound of a shattered violin still echoed, a requiem for the childhood Gio never got to finish. And a symbol of the cost of secrets kept too long and truths told too carelessly.